It's news time. Information is power. The current, the news headline. The same people who want Buhari to fight corruption looted aggressively at a burning mall. The news in full. Nigerians, like every other citizens of the country, are looking forward to those at the helm of affairs to transform their nation and make it great. While Nigeria's major problem for more than a decade now has been insecurity, poverty, unemployment, and corruption. Traders were left counting their losses following the report of the fire outbreak at the popular Nest Cash and Carry supermarket in the Federal Capital Territory of Abuja, and according to report, firefighters failed to arrive at the scene of the unfortunate incident on time, resulting in a massive loss of valuable items. Meanwhile, some residents were caught on camera carting away some valuable items from the supermarket as the fire reached, and they were moving items such as phones, beverages, and so on. At this point, we can't tell if the residents were simply assisting in their small way, or if they took advantage of the unfortunate circumstances to steal from the mall. But the police later on apprehended some suspects believed to be looters, and I began to wonder why some people could be this heartless. We saw a similar case of looting when the NSAS protest got hijacked by hoodlums, and if you want a better Nigeria, we need to start that from the grassroots. And charity, they say, begins at home, and we can't call out politicians ruling us for corruption if at the grassroots level we cannot help our brothers and sisters at point of need. Imagine looting from people who are in pain after their shop got razed by the fierce inferno. This is inhumane. However, just early this morning, it was reported that everyone that were cutting the goods away from the supermarket were actually doing that to save the goods from being destroyed by the inferno, and were particularly kept at some spots so that they can actually be saved from the fire. Also, Muhammadu Buhari was seen as the nemesis of corrupt politicians, and that image, which could not help him during previous electoral attempts, was capitalized on by the Southwest media to burnish and garnish a political reputation against an admittedly helplessly gutless and hapless leadership of Goodluck Jonathan. But history is a mercilessly ruthless judge. While previously clueless and corrupt, Jonathan has become a beautiful bride of international diplomacy and democratic behavior. The anti-corruption warrior is now mired in a government that, by its own reckoning, has become the most inept and corrupt in our history. To be fair, the president did not promise much in the electioneering campaigns in both elections. Throughout the campaigns, his mantra, repeated like a broken record, was fighting corruption, insurgency, and improving the economy. His performance on all three counts is suspect, dubious, and undistinguished. Most people would even declare him a failure. By its own admission, even the government does not point to any of them as its main achievement, which is curious. To it, their greatest achievement is building infrastructure, which was a kind of an afterthought, as it never featured in its 2015 election campaigns. The curiosity is, how could one major in a subject on which he was not tested in an examination? On his greatest failure, agreement will be as difficult to reach. Insecurity has become a major menace in the country, and no part of his nation is spared. But because that is not his greatest failure, nor is the crumbling economy, which he was never given a chance in the first place. It has never been this bad since the war, and although President Muhammadu Buhari was elected to deal with the problem of insurgency in the northeast, his regime was added the nefarious activities of herdsmen and now bandits, who have not only made life brutally short and unbearable for most rural communities, especially farmers who have abandoned their farms, which has led to the threat of food scarcity and hunger in the country. The Nigerians are paying such humongous price on account of corruption in the public service in a government that promised to stamp it out is a monumental indictment of President Muhammadu Buhari and his legitimacy for the office. The paradox is that for every extra kobo that goes into fictitious projects and salaries, There is a corresponding denial of public-oriented spending to improve people's lives. Also, such increase in recurrent spending is directly responsible for the unending borrowing by this government to fund its acclaimed infrastructure development in a situation that mortgages the future of the country and the next generation. Consequently, the reason we are borrowing is not entirely because there is no money, as government has consistently maintained, but because its employees are siphoning the money into their private pockets at the expense of the generality of Nigerians. The obvious implication of this development is that the current anti-corruption strategy is defective and inappropriate, thinking that the main culprits in corruption are the political office holders. This view featured heavily in Buhari's approach in dealing with members of the Second Republic political class. But it is simply untenable because the political class does not have accounting powers, which belongs to the career civil servants. So it is financially impossible for the politicians to steal money from government coffers without the active involvement and collusion of the bureaucrats themselves. Also, for a minister or commissioner to steal a dime, the bureaucrat must be involved. Entire budgets of the country through the manners of expenditure. They also prepare the budget. Therefore, we have to revise and change the approach and train searchlight more on the public servants to actually get to the root of the matter. And also, focusing on the few political office holders is a waste of time and resources, which has been proved by the failure of this government to stamp out corruption in the country, and there is need to digitalize government processes to reduce human interference which ultimately conduces for corruption. But most importantly, government must improve the remuneration of public servants to motivate them and discourage corrupt practices. However, it is necessary to properly determine the right workforce in the country. And this evidence from the COVID-19 measures, which has kept level 1 to level 13 workers, constituting over 85% of the personnel at home for over a year, and shows that most of them are not really needed. And this is the reason why it is better for the government to focus more on how to further ensure that the civil workers are actually, given much more support so that they can be motivated, and therefore, the practices of the corrupt practices would actually be extremely minimal, if not stopped entirely. And this would help us to ensure that the root of corruption is actually destroyed. Thanks for listening.